Imagine a strict professor, proud of his brilliance, humiliating a simple cleaning woman by forcing her to solve an impossible math problem. The students laugh, certain she will fail. But then her hand moves across the board with impossible precision, unraveling a puzzle no one else could solve. The room falls silent. The professor, shaken to his core, begins to question who she truly is. His obsession grows, pulling him into dark streets and a hidden chamber filled with glowing equations that seem alive, and when he touches them, what he discovers does not elevate him, it consumes him. So who was this woman? What terrifying truth did she carry behind her calm, ordinary face? Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see genius. Forever, the classroom was silent. Only the ticking of the old wall clock broke the stillness. Rows of polished desks reflected the pale morning light that filtered through the tall windows. At the front stood Professor Armand, his sharp eyes scanning the students with authority. He carried himself like a man who ruled not only the classroom, but also the knowledge within it. Beside him, near the last row, stood a woman in plain clothes. Her hands were folded tightly, and her gaze remained low, avoiding the professor's stare. She was not a student. She was a cleaning woman, tasked with tidying the room before lessons began. But today, fate had pulled her into something unexpected. The professor's voice boomed, filled with arrogance. "You there? Step forward." Her heart quickened, pounding heavy in her chest. The students shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. Waiting for a show. She stepped slowly toward the blackboard, her shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. Chalk dust floated in the air. Sharp against her nose, the professor pointed at the board where an equation stretched across the surface, long and tangled like a maze of symbols. "Solve this," he ordered, his tone sharp. Almost mocking, the woman froze, her breath caught. In her throat, the numbers and symbols seemed to swim before her eyes. The students laughed, certain she would stumble and embarrass herself. The professor's smirk deepened. Confident that his challenge would humiliate her, her fingers brushed against the cold chalk resting in the tray. The touch sent a shiver through her arms. Something stirred inside her. Came memory of long-forgotten nights spent with books and equations under a dim light. She reached for the chalk, gripping it firmly, the sound of her heartbeat filling her ears. One slow breath, and another. Her hand lifted, and with steady strokes, she began to write. The room fell silent once again, but this time with a different kind of stillness. Each mark she made on the board was precise, deliberate, flowing with a confidence that silenced even the whispers. The professor's eyes narrowed. The smirk faded from his lips. He leaned forward, his jaw tightening as the impossible began to unfold before him. The woman's hand moved faster now, equations collapsing and rearranging into simple truths. The problem, one that had stumped advanced students for weeks, unraveled beneath her fingertips. A bead of sweat rolled down the professor's temple. The students sat frozen, wide-eyed, unable to look away. The woman placed the chalk back onto the tray, her work complete. She stepped aside, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The board glowed with clarity. The solution, undeniable. The silence grew heavier, suffocating, waiting for the professor's response. His lips parted, but no words emerged. His hands trembled as if the ground beneath him had shifted for the first time. The great Professor Armand looked uncertain, and the woman, once invisible in her plain clothes, stood revealed as something extraordinary. "Would you like me to continue building suspense from here into a deeper, shocking climax, where the professor himself faces humiliation, or even a breakdown?" The professor's face turned pale. The authority in his posture faltered. His shoulders stiff, as though struck by an unseen blow. He stared at the board, unwilling to believe what his own eyes confirmed. The answer was flawless. The woman did not glance at him. She lowered her gaze once more, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if solving the impossible were as natural as breathing. The students erupted into whispers, their voices sharp and excited, slicing through the tense air. she really solve it? How could she know that? The professor raised his hand, demanding silence, but his voice trembled. He tried to speak with authority, yet the crack in his tone betrayed him. Explain, he said. The woman's eyes lifted slowly. Meeting his for the first time, her stare was calm, steady, unflinching. There is nothing to explain, she replied softly. Her words carried no arrogance, no pride, only quiet certainty. The professor felt heat rising in his chest. Shame pressed against him like a weight, choking his breath. This was supposed to be his moment of power. This was supposed to prove his dominance instead. It had exposed a weakness he never imagined. The students watched him, not her. Their eyes searched for his reaction, waiting to see their master shaken. The professor stepped back, his foot catching slightly against the leg of his own desk. The scrape of wood against the floor echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. His jaw clenched. But his hands betrayed him with a slight tremor. The woman placed her hands behind her back, ready to leave, but the professor's voice stopped her. Who are you? He demanded, his words sharp, almost desperate. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I am nobody, she said, and the room grew colder. The truth of her brilliance, hanging heavier than the air itself. Would you like me to? Keep driving this scene into a darker turn, where the professor's desperation spirals into something unsettling before the final climax. The professor's breath quickened. The chalkboard, filled with her flawless solution, loomed behind him like a silent accusation. His pride, built over decades of lectures and accolades, began to fracture. The murmurs of the students pressed closer, like 100 needles piercing his skin. Maybe she is smarter than him. Did he really fail to solve it himself? Each whisper struck him harder than any insult spoken aloud. The woman stood still, her plain figure casting no shadow of arrogance, yet her very silence screamed louder than triumph. The professor's hands curled into fists. No, he muttered, under his breath, his voice too low for most to hear. Then louder, the force that betrayed his desperation. You must have memorized it. Someone told you the answer. The woman did not move. Her eyes softened, but not with pity, only with quiet understanding. I did not need anyone, she answered. Her calm tone was more devastating than anger. The professor's throat tightened. He looked back at the board, as if the numbers themselves might betray her, but they stood firm, unshakable, carved in logic and truth. A bead of sweat slipped down his cheek. The students leaned forward, their faith in their teacher cracking with every second of his silence. The room smelled of chalk and dust, but to him it felt suffocating, like drowning in his own humiliation. He slammed his palm on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The students flinched, their whispers dying instantly. Yet nothing could erase what they had witnessed. And in that silence, the professor realized he had not defeated a simple woman. He had awakened a force that could shatter the foundation of his authority. The woman bowed her head slightly, as though excusing herself from a conversation that no longer held meaning. Her steps toward the door were unhurried, steady, each one echoing with finality. But before she reached the threshold, the professor's voice broke again, raw and shaken. Wait. The word hung in the air, trembling with something darker than curiosity, something closer to fear. Do you want me to continue into the moment where the professor's desperation fully unravels, turning the atmosphere more unsettling and intense? The woman paused at the doorway. Her back remained straight, her hand resting lightly on the wooden frame. The classroom held its breath. Every student's eyes shifted from her still figure to the trembling professor. He stepped forward, polished, shoes dragging against the floor as if the weight of his pride resisted each movement. Tell me, he said, his voice strained, almost breaking. What are you hiding? The woman turned her head slightly, the faint light from the window outlining her calm profile. I hide nothing, she replied. Her voice was steady, almost too steady, in contrast to the storm unraveling inside him. The professor's heart hammered violently. It was not just the solution that haunted him. was the realization that her very existence threatened everything he built. If she, a woman of no position, no recognition, could solve what his brightest students could not, what did that make of him? His throat felt dry. His mind screamed for control. But control had already slipped from his grasp. The students, once devoted to his brilliance, now stared at him with something else. Doubt the professor's hand shook as he pointed to the board. "Prove it again," he demanded. But the command lacked its usual force. It sounded hollow, desperate. Like a plea, the woman's eyes met his one final time. Her gaze was sharp, unwavering, and for an instant, he felt as though she were looking directly through him. "You already know it is true," she said softly. Her words struck deeper than any rebuke. She turned, stepping beyond the doorway, her figure disappearing into the dimly lit corridor. The professor staggered back, the classroom pressing in around him like a tightening cage. The chalkboard still glared with her perfect solution, each line mocking the authority he once carried so easily. His vision blurred, his chest heaving with unsteady breaths. The students remained frozen, their silence heavy, her teacher unraveling before them, and for the first time in his life, Professor Armand felt something colder than failure. He felt fear. "Would you like me to carry this into the next stage where the professors?" Fear grows into obsession with uncovering who she truly is. Professor Armand gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. The echo of her footsteps in the corridor faded, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt alive. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breath sharp, as if the air itself resisted him. The students still sat in stunned quiet, their eyes fixed on him, no longer with admiration, but with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He could not bear it. He snapped the attendance book shut, the sound jolting through the room. "Class dismissed," he barked, though his voice cracked. Betraying his unraveling composure, chairs scraped against the floor as the students hurried out, whispering behind their hands, their glances cutting him deeper than knives. He sank into his chair, his body heavy, his mind burning. The chalkboard loomed in front of him, her flawless solution still written across it. Every symbol seemed to pulse, taunting him, searing itself into his memory. He pressed his palms against his temples, fighting the wave of nausea rising in his stomach. Who was she? How could someone unseen, someone ordinary, carry such terrifying brilliance? The thought clamped around his chest. If word spread, his reputation, his authority, his very name would crumble. The image of her calm face returned to him, her words echoing like a blade twisting slowly. "I hide nothing." He slammed his fist against the desk, the sharp crack resounding in the empty room. He whispered harshly, "You hide everything." His eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting her shadow to return. The wooden floor beneath him felt unsteady, the air colder, heavier. An obsession began to stir, dark and restless, curling its fingers around his mind. He could not allow her brilliance to exist in silence. He had to know who she was, and more than that, he had to prove that she was not greater than him, even if it meant destroying her. "Do you want me to continue?" By showing how his obsession begins to follow her outside the classroom, turning the story into a more tense and unsettling chase. That night, Professor Armand did not sleep. The shadows of his study stretched long across the walls, broken only by the dim glow of a single lamp. Books lay open in piles around him, their pages covered in frantic notes and scratched equations. But every time he lowered his pen, he saw her face again, calm, silent, unshaken. Her eyes had pierced through him, stripping away the armor of authority he had worn for decades. He could not banish the image of her hand moving across the board, the elegance of her solution mocking his pride. A woman with no title, no recognition, had reduced him to nothing with a piece of chalk. His fists clenched, the knuckles raw from pounding against the desk. He whispered her words into the empty room, his voice ragged. "I hide nothing." The phrase gnawed at him, twisting into something unbearable. If she truly hid nothing, then why did she vanish into obscurity? Why had he, with all his influence and brilliance, never heard her name? He pushed himself up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. His reflection in the darkened window startled him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, almost hollow. "This will not stand," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He needed to find her. He needed to tear away whatever veil she wore, to expose her secret, to prove she was not beyond him. The thought of her walking freely in the world, carrying knowledge that eclipsed his own, filled him with dread that bordered on madness. He pulled on his coat with shaking hands, the fabric heavy against his shoulders. The corridors of the academy were silent at this late hour, every step echoing like a drumbeat in his skull. Outside, the night air bit at his skin, sharp and unforgiving. The streets were nearly empty, but he moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as though she might emerge from the darkness itself. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, she existed, and until he uncovered the truth, he would know no peace. Would you like me to continue into the next part, where he begins stalking her life beyond the classroom, blurring the line between pursuit of knowledge and something far more dangerous? The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried secrets. Professor Armand walked with long, uneven strides, his breath misting in the cold night air. The cobblestone streets gleamed faintly under the flicker of oil lamps, but the alleys beyond remained swallowed in shadow. He asked himself if she lived here. Among these narrow lanes and shuttered windows, a woman so plain, so invisible, could slip through the world unnoticed. That thought unsettled him more than the darkness itself. He moved from street to street, his eyes scanning doorways, searching for a Sanini Sinov, her presence. At last, he caught sight of her. She was walking ahead, her steps steady, carrying a small basket tucked against her arm. Her clothes were simple, threadbare even, blending with the gray of the night. But there was something unearthly about her calmness, as though the weight of the world did not touch her at all. Armand stopped. For a moment, he simply watched, his chest tightening. She did not look back. She walked as though she already knew. He was there. The sound of her footsteps on the stone was soft, measured, and each one seemed to strike his nerves like a drumbeat. He followed. The street narrowed into a darker lane, where the lamps no longer burned. Shadows spilled thick against the walls. The smell of damp stone clung to the air. Her figure remained ahead, unhurried, never faltering. Armand's pulse hammered in his throat. This was his chance to confront her, to demand the truth she concealed. He quickened his pace, his shoes striking louder now, no longer careful to hide his pursuit, but the distance between them did not close, no matter how fast he walked. She remained just out of reach, her steps echoing steady, unbroken. The cold tightened around him like a noose, and in that moment, a terrible thought crossed his mind. Was she leading him somewhere? Do you want me to continue by revealing where? She leads him a place that shifts the story from obsession into something darker and more haunting. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly. The walls on either side grew higher, pressing inward, their stone damp and glistening as if alive. Armand's breath came ragged now, his chest heaving, yet the woman's pace remained steady, her figure always just far enough to escape his reach. The night deepened, the silence thickening, broken only by the echo of his pursuit. He tried to call out, but his voice cracked, swallowed by the oppressive air. At last, she stopped. She stood at the end of the lane, her back still to him, facing a wooden door half buried in ivy and shadow. The door looked ancient, its surface scarred, as though countless hands had pressed against it through the years. Armand slowed, his pulse pounding in his ears, his throat tightened. Yet a strange pull dragged him closer. The woman's head tilted slightly, enough to reveal the faint curve of her cheek in the dim light. "You should not have followed," she said. Her voice was soft, but in the narrow alley, it reverberated with an uncanny weight. Armand froze, his breath catching. The word struck him with both warning and invitation. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice trembled against his will. The woman laid her hand on the door. Her fingers, pale against the blackened wood, seemed almost to merge with it. For a moment, silence wrapped the alley, stretching unbearably long. Then, with a slow groan, the door began to open, its hinges shrieking as if resisting. A cold draft spilled out, sharper and heavier than the night air, carrying with it a smell he could not place iron. Dust, and something older, something unsettling. She stepped inside without hesitation, her plain figure dissolving into the shadows beyond. Armand hesitated at the threshold, his body screaming to turn back. But his mind, burning with obsession, pulled him forward. He placed one hand against the doorframe, the wood cold beneath. His skin, the darkness inside, seemed endless, almost alive, waiting, and with a single breath, he crossed the threshold. "Would you like me to continue and reveal what lies beyond the door? Something that will blur the line between her genius and something far more unnatural?" The air inside was heavier, thick with the scent of damp stone, and something metallic that stung the back of his throat. Armand's footsteps echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the vast silence. The space was not a room, but a cavernous hall. Hidden beneath the town, its ceiling lost in shadows. Faint lines of chalk covered the walls and floor. Endless symbols twisting like veins, their pale glow flickering as though alive. He froze, his breath shallow. It was mathematics, but not like anything he had ever seen. Formulas stretched into spirals, collapsing and reforming, symbols older than any system he had studied, merging logic with something that felt almost otherworldly. At the center of the hall stood the woman. Her basket rested quietly at her feet, as ordinary as her plain dress, yet she seemed transformed. The stillness around her was absolute, commanding as though the very air bent to her presence. "You should leave," she said, her voice echoing low, rippling through the chamber. But Armand stepped forward, drawn in spite of the dread coiling in his gut. His eyes darted to the glowing equations, his heart pounding with both terror and hunger. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The woman turned her head, her gaze settling on him. Her eyes were no longer the calm of the classroom, they burned, sharp and unblinking, like something ancient looking through borrowed flesh. "This," she said softly, "is the truth behind numbers. The language before your world had words." Armand staggered, the ground tilting beneath him. He clutched at his chest, his breath ragged, his pride cracking under the immensity of what surrounded him. He wanted to run, he wanted to kneel, but above all, he wanted to know, and the deeper part of him realized that wanting might cost far more than he could bear. "Do you want me to continue with him, stepping deeper into the chamber, where his obsession with knowledge begins to drag him into a dangerous bargain with her?" Armand's shoes scraped against the stone floor as he stumbled closer, his eyes wide, unable to look away from the shifting formulas that pulsed faintly across the walls. Every line seemed to whisper. Though no voice spoke, he could almost hear them: patterns, rhythms. Something vast and inhuman threading through his mind like a song too, large to contain. His chest ached with both awe and terror. The woman stood, unmoving in the center, her hands folded neatly, her plain figure at odds with the impossible glow that surrounded her. "You should leave," she repeated, though her voice was softer now, almost sorrowful. Armand shook his head, his voice rising from somewhere between desperation and madness. "No, I cannot leave. Not without knowing." His trembling hand gestured toward the walls, toward the spiraling numbers. This is beyond any science, beyond any theorem ever written. What are you? What is this?" The woman's eyes lingered on him, steady, unblinking. "I am nothing. More than what you fear," she said. Her words seemed to sink into him, pulling at something deep within. The glowing equations flickered brighter, reacting to her voice as if alive. Armand's pulse thundered. He stepped closer still, his hand reaching toward one of the walls. The symbols there shimmered faintly, as if waiting for him to touch, but the woman's voice cut through the air, sharp, now commanding. "Do not place your hand there." Armand froze, his fingers trembling, inches away from the surface. His mind screamed at him to stop, yet his obsession burned hotter than his fear. If this is truth, he rasped, then I must have it. The silence that followed was crushing. The woman's expression did not change. But her words fell heavy, final. Truth is not something you take, it is something that consumes. The ground beneath them rumbled faintly, dust spilling from the unseen ceiling. The glowing equations pulsed like a heartbeat. Faster. Brighter and still. Armand could not step back. Would you like me to continue with what happens when he ignores her warning and makes contact with the living equations? Asterisk. His hand hovered, trembling. The cold glow of the symbols casting strange shadows across his face. For an instant, the entire hall seemed to wait silent, expectant. Then his fingertips brushed the wall. A searing shock tore through his body. Not heat, not pain, but something deeper, invasion. A flood of numbers and patterns forcing themselves into his mind. He gasped, his knees buckling, his body convulsing as the equations blazed brighter with each heartbeat. Visions ripped across his eyes, endless spirals of numbers folding into stars, collapsing into voids, rearranging into shapes his human mind was never meant to see. He felt his thoughts split, fracture, then reassemble in ways that made no sense, yet revealed truths too vast to endure. Screams tore from his throat, though. He could not tell if they belonged to him. The woman did not move. Her gaze remained fixed on him, calm, sorrowful, unshaken, as though she had seen this before. Armand collapsed to the ground, his hands clawing at the stone as if trying to hold on to something real, but the numbers were inside him now, carving themselves across his thoughts, whispering truths he could not bear. His eyes rolled back, white, his voice breaking into incoherent fragments of equations and desperate cries. The woman's shadow stretched long across the glowing floor. You were warned, she said softly, almost like a prayer for the doomed. The chamber pulsed once, violently shaking dust from the ceiling, and then it stilled. Armand lay on the floor, trembling, his breath ragged, his eyes staring wide at nothing but the numbers. Did not leave him. They crawled behind his gaze, flickering like faint lights, as though the truth had marked him forever. Would you like me to continue into the aftermath where he survives? But forever changed, his obsession turning into madness. That spreads beyond this chamber? Asterisk. The chamber settled into silence. The faint glow of the equations dimmed, retreating into still lines of chalk, as if nothing had stirred at all. Professor Armand lay on the cold stone floor, his breath shallow, his face pale, his hands still twitched, tracing invisible symbols in the air, fragments of numbers spilling from his lips in broken whispers. The woman stood above him, her eyes steady, her presence calm against the chaos unraveling within him. You sought to master truth, she said. Quietly, her voice carried no judgment, only finality. But truth masters those who chase it without humility. Armand's eyes fluttered open, glazed with exhaustion. He stared at her, not with defiance, but with the fragile recognition of a man who had seen too much. The brilliance he had coveted now burned inside him like a wound that would never heal. The woman turned, lifting her basket once more, her plain figure unchanged. As though nothing extraordinary had taken place, she walked toward the open door. Her steps measured, unhurried. The heavy wood groaned as it closed behind her, shutting out the faint glow. Of the chamber, Armand remained on the floor, his whispers fading into silence. In the stillness, only the faint echo of her words lingered, like an eternal reminder. The genius he had sought had been real, but it was never his to command, and so the simple woman disappeared back into obscurity, carrying with her a truth too vast for the world, leaving behind only a broken man who once thought himself untouchable.